The medieval homeless weren't who you might imagine. Yes, there were beggars and vagrants, but the streets also filled with migrant workers stranded after harvest season, widows without family support, disabled veterans from endless wars, and victims of fire or disease who'd lost everything overnight. In a world without social safety nets, anyone could fall into destitution with shocking speed. The composition varied by season and circumstance. After the Black Death in 1347 to 1351, orphaned children flooded cities across Europe. Economic downturns pushed entire families onto the streets when fathers couldn't find work. Peasants fleeing failed harvests or oppressive lords arrived at city gates, hoping for opportunity, but often found only competition for scarce resources. Medieval society categorized the poor into deserving and undeserving. The deserving poor: widows, orphans, the elderly, the disabled. Theoretically warranted charity. The undeserving poor: able-bodied men without work, faced suspicion and hostility. Authorities viewed them as lazy or criminal, though economic reality often left them no choice. This distinction determined who received charity and who faced punishment. When winter approached, survival became a calculated strategy. The homeless congregated around specific heat sources throughout the city. Bakeries were prime real estate. Ovens ran through the night, and the external walls radiated warmth until dawn. In cities like London or Paris, commercial bakeries were required by law to operate continuously to meet bread demands. The homeless knew these schedules intimately and would arrive after dark, pressing against the warm stone walls. Public bathhouses, common in larger medieval cities, offered another refuge. These establishments burned fires continuously to heat water, and their outer walls became overnight shelters. The homeless would press against these warm stones, sometimes dozens deep, fighting for position closest to the heat. Bathhouse owners occasionally chased them away, but on the coldest nights, many looked the other way. Some bathhouses in Italian and German cities even allowed the poor to enter for reduced rates during extreme cold, seeing it as an act of Christian charity. Smithies and metalworking shops provided similar opportunities. Forges required constant heat, and while smiths often worked late, the walls remained warm through the night. Glassmaking workshops, particularly in Venice and other glassmaking centers, ran furnaces that never fully cooled. The homeless mapped these heat sources like treasure, passing knowledge through their networks about which workshops tolerated their presence and which owners would set dogs on them. Communal ovens, where citizens baked bread, operated on schedules. The homeless learned these rhythms. When the last batch finished, when ashes still glowed hot, when they could huddle near the structures without interfering with business. Some paid a copper coin or performed small tasks for the privilege of sleeping nearby. Churches played a complicated role. Canon law and Christian charity demanded that churches provide some shelter, but the reality varied wildly. Some churches opened their naves on the coldest nights, allowing the poor to sleep on stone floors that were marginally warmer than the streets outside. Others kept their doors firmly locked, fearing theft or simply overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of desperate people. Monasteries were generally more reliable, with many maintaining dedicated almoners' halls where they distributed food and basic shelter. The Benedictine rule specifically commanded hospitality to the poor, and some monasteries allowed the destitute to sleep in outbuildings or stables. The Cistercians, Franciscans, and other orders took vows of poverty themselves, and often showed greater sympathy toward the homeless. During Advent and Lent, charitable giving increased as the wealthy sought spiritual merit, and monasteries distributed more generously. Cathedral chapters sometimes maintained hospices specifically for the poor. Notre Dame in Paris, for example, supported the Hotel Dieu Hospital directly adjacent to its walls. Canterbury Cathedral maintained several charitable institutions. These weren't acts of pure altruism. The Church taught that giving to the poor was spiritually beneficial, potentially reducing time in purgatory. The homeless understood this and timed their begging to coincide with religious festivals when guilt and piety ran highest. However, church charity came with conditions. Many institutions required attendance at prayers or masses. Some demanded labor in exchange for food and shelter. The distinction between charity and exploitation could blur. Was it Christian mercy to shelter someone, or exploitation to extract their labor in exchange for bare survival? Hospitals in this era weren't medical facilities as we'd recognize them. They were charitable institutions that provided basic shelter, food, and care for the poor, pilgrims, and sick. Cities like Paris, London, and Florence maintained several such hospitals. The Hotel Dieu in Paris could shelter hundreds, though conditions were grim. Multiple people shared single beds, disease spread rapidly, and many who entered never left. Still, for the homeless, a spot in a hospital meant survival through winter. St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London, founded in 1123, provided beds and basic care. Similar institutions existed across Europe: Santo Spirito in Rome, Santa Maria Nuova in Florence, St. Thomas's in London. These hospitals operated on donations from wealthy patrons seeking salvation through charity. Competition for beds was fierce, and hospitals often prioritized local poor over strangers, the sick over the merely destitute, and women and children over able-bodied men. Some cities established specialized hospices, leper hospitals, called Lazar Houses, existed on city outskirts. While intended for leprosy sufferers, they sometimes sheltered other desperate poor during winter emergencies. Plague hospitals, established after the Black Death, served similar dual purposes during non-epidemic periods. Guild halls occasionally provided charity to members who'd fallen on hard times. A carpenter injured and unable to work might receive support from his guild, including winter shelter. This safety net didn't extend to non-guild members, reinforcing social hierarchies even among the poor. Clothing was perhaps the most critical defense against cold. The homeless collected rags obsessively, layering whatever they could find. Wool was the prize material. It insulated even when wet, unlike linen. The poor scavenged wool scraps from textile workshops, stole from drying lines, or begged cast-offs from households. Some wrapped their feet in strips of cloth bound with cord, creating primitive insulation. Others stuffed their ragged tunics with straw or dried grass for added warmth, though this made them easy targets for mockery and sometimes violence from city watch. Communal sleeping was essential. Groups of homeless would huddle together in doorways, under market stalls, or in any sheltered alcove they could find. Body heat became a shared resource. These weren't random clusters. They were often organized groups with hierarchies and rules. Older homeless individuals, or those with disabilities, were sometimes given interior positions in the huddle, while stronger members took the exposed edges. This cooperation was survival, not altruism. Fire was both salvation and risk. The homeless built small fires in alleys or abandoned spaces, gathering around them through the night. They burned whatever they could find. Wood scraps from workshops, market refuse, even animal dung when desperate. City authorities periodically cracked down on these fires, fearing they'd spread to wooden buildings. Medieval cities burned with terrifying regularity, and vagrant fires were convenient scapegoats. When caught, the homeless faced beatings, fines they couldn't pay, or expulsion from the city entirely. Some found work that provided winter shelter. Stables always needed hands to muck stalls and care for animals. The pay was minimal or non-existent, but sleeping in hay alongside horses meant warmth and protection from wind. Similarly, some inns allowed the destitute to sleep near kitchens in exchange for washing dishes or hauling water. These arrangements were precarious. One misstep, one accusation of theft, and they'd be back on the streets. The city infrastructure itself offered shelter. Bridge houses, built on major bridges like London Bridge, sometimes had spaces underneath where the homeless congregated. City walls had towers and gatehouses with corners that blocked wind. Some cities had covered market halls that emptied at night, providing temporary shelter until merchants arrived at dawn. The homeless learned every architectural detail that might offer a few degrees of warmth or protection from snow. Certain neighborhoods were more tolerant than others. Poor quarters, where authorities rarely patrolled, became unofficial refuges. Dock areas, always busy with sailors and cargo, offered opportunities for casual labor and places to sleep among warehouses. Tanning districts, relegated to city outskirts due to their terrible smell, provided shelter that wealthier citizens avoided. City gates presented both opportunity and danger. During the day, beggars positioned themselves where travelers entered, hoping for charity from pilgrims or merchants. At night, some gates had guardrooms with fires where sympathetic watchmen might allow a vagrant to warm themselves briefly. Other guards were brutal, viewing the homeless as potential criminals. Begging strategies intensified in winter. The successful beggars positioned themselves at church entrances where the faithful felt obligated to demonstrate charity, especially during Advent and Christmas. They displayed their suffering, exposed wounds, shivering children, visible disabilities, to evoke piety and fear in potential donors. Medieval people believed that giving to the poor might save their own souls, but they also feared that refusing charity could bring divine punishment. The homeless exploited this anxiety expertly. Legal status made everything harder. Vagrants had few rights. City laws often prohibited begging entirely or restricted it to native poor. Outsiders could be whipped and expelled. Some cities issued begging licenses to local poor, giving them legal protection that foreign homeless lacked. This created hierarchies among the destitute, licensed beggars versus illegal vagrants, and sometimes violent competition for the best begging spots. Death was commonplace. Every winter morning, city authorities collected frozen corpses from doorways and alleys. Some cities maintained burial grounds specifically for indigent dead. Mass graves where the nameless and homeless were interred with minimal ceremony. The actual mortality rate is impossible to know precisely, but chronicles from harsh winters like 1316 to 1317 during the Great Famine describe streets littered with dead poor. In less extreme years, mortality was lower but still significant. Perhaps 10 to 20% of the homeless population wouldn't survive to spring. The medieval homeless didn't survive winter through any single strategy, but through desperate combinations of charity, theft, community, and sheer endurance. Many didn't survive at all. If you found this glimpse into medieval survival fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe for more historical deep dives. Drop a comment telling me what aspect of medieval life you want explored next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.